Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for another incredible AI race simulation. Today, we are live in Montreal at the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve for the Canadian Grand Prix. I'm Lee, and I'm joined in the booth once again by our resident F1 expert, Sally.
Thanks, Lee. It is a relentless layout today. They will be flat out for 2/3 of the lap, hitting 210 miles per hour down the straights. Precision is everything through these chicanes, especially the final one, where a brave overtake could end right in the wall of champions.
Thanks, Sally. The drivers are ready, and
It's go, go, go!
from Canada, George Russell is first off the line there and briefly steals away P1 from Charles Leclerc. But Leclerc is quick to block him off. But George keeps on pushing and looks to have the inside line to regain the lead on the first corner. Well, Sally, what a start to this one.
Absolutely incredible, Lee. Russell already out in front after starting in P2.
Well, you predicted another Mercedes 1-2 punch, Sally? Maybe Lando Norris and McLaren will have something to say about that, though. You said the rest of the grid will be fighting it out for third, but I'm sure the McLaren team will have done their homework for today. One thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting race.
We are supposed to get a bit of rain here today too, Lee. The weather could make it interesting. It is one of the great levelers in sport.
Very good point, Sally. When the heavens open, it completely tears up the script. It reminds me of that NFL game last season where the Rams got completely caught out in that driving rainstorm against the Panthers. All their performance advantages just washed right away in the mud.
Exactly, Lee. A slick track doesn't care about your engineering budget or your horsepower. When it gets this greasy, it forces everyone to rely on pure, raw survival instinct.
I'm sure everyone is keeping a close eye on the weather radars today. All right, Sally, we are well into this race now, and I've got to say, this track has an incredibly unique vibe. It doesn't look like a purpose-built racetrack, and it doesn't look like a standard city street circuit either. What's the story behind this place, and why do the drivers look like they're simultaneously loving and fearing every single lap?
That's because it's exactly that, a hybrid of both. We are on Notre Dame Island, a man-made island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River that was built for the 1967 World Expo. The track itself is made up of the island's everyday park access roads. It hosted its very first Grand Prix back in 1978 under the name Île Notre Dame Circuit, and in a fairy tale script, it was won by Canada's own legendary hero, Gilles Villeneuve, driving a Ferrari. When he tragically passed away in 1982, the track was renamed in his honour.
A home win for the first ever race? You couldn't script it better. But looking at the layout, it feels like a giant series of drags and hard stops. How is this track actually broken down across the three sectors?
It is the definition of a stop-and-go power track, Lee. It demands a very low downforce setup so the cars can fly on the straights, but that makes them an absolute handful in the braking zones. Let's break down each of the sectors. Sector 1 starts right on the main straight and plunges you into turns 1 and 2, the Senna S. Turn 1 is a tight left-hander that immediately opens into a swirling looping right-hander at turn 2. It's incredibly tight, and on lap 1, it's a notorious bottleneck for multi-car tangles. From there, the drivers accelerate hard through the curved back straight of turn 3 before hitting the quick right-left flick of turns 4 and 5.
Yeah, I noticed that the barriers through turn 4 and 5 are practically right on the white lines. There's absolutely zero margin for error there.
Exactly. Then you hit Sector 2, which begins with a heavy braking zone into the slow left-hand turn 6, followed immediately by turn 7. This is where drivers have to launch the car violently over the curbs to get a straight line out. Then you blast down a short straight into another right-left chicane at turns 8 and 9. If you brake even a fraction of a second too late here, you are going straight into the tarmac runoff. But Sector 3 is where the real drama happens. It starts with the heavy braking zone into turn 10, the famous amphitheatre-like hairpin. Cars slow down from well over 180 miles per hour down to just 40 miles per hour. This is the premier overtaking spot on the circuit. Once you survive the hairpin, you accelerate down the massive Casino Straight, a 1.16-kilometre flat-out blast where drivers reach speeds up to 215 miles per hour. And at the very end of that straight lies the final chicane, turns 13 and 14.
Ah, yes, the infamous final chicane. That's where the Wall of Champions sits, right? Why is it called that? Did a bunch of champions just pool their money together to buy the advertising space on it?
Unfortunately, it's a bit more dramatic than that. It earned that legendary, terrifying nickname in a single weekend back in 1999. During the race, 3 different Formula One world champions, Michael Schumacher, Damon Hill, and Canada's own Jacques Villeneuve, all made the exact same mistake. They carried too much speed through turn 13, launched off the high curve, lost the rear of the car, and slammed violently into the concrete wall on the exit of turn 14. The wall actually used to say, "Bienvenue au Québec," welcome to Quebec, on it. Talk about a brutal welcome.
Wow. Imagine being a world champion and getting taken out by a wall that's politely welcoming you to the country. Has anyone else hit it since?
Jenson Button hit it in 2005 and Sebastian Vettel wrecked his Red Bull against it during practice in 2011. The drivers absolutely dread it because to get a good lap time, you have to kiss the curb in the chicane, which naturally spits the car out within millimetres of that concrete barrier. If the car gets airborne even slightly, you're a passenger.
So it's an absolute puzzle of a track. What are the actual lap times these guys are pulling out here?
In dry conditions, the outright race lap record is a 1 minute 13.078, set by Valtteri Bottas back in 2019 in his Mercedes. In qualifying, they get down into the low 1 minute 11 seconds or even 10 seconds. The race itself runs for 70 laps, covering a total distance of just over 305 kilometres.
You mentioned earlier it's a stop-and-go track. That must mean it's incredibly brutal on the equipment.
It is arguably the most brake-heavy track on the entire calendar alongside Monza and Singapore. Because you are constantly transitioning from 200 miles per hour down to low speeds, the carbon brake discs take an absolute beating. They can reach temperatures over 1,000 degrees Celsius. If a driver doesn't manage their brake cooling or rides the pedal too hard, the brakes will quite literally explode or fail completely mid-race.
And what about the driver's perspective? When they sit down in the media pen, do they love coming to Montreal, or is it just a massive headache?
They absolutely adore it. It's a consensus paddock favourite. The drivers love it because it feels like an old-school, high-speed go-kart track. It's got a rhythm to it. Brake hard, launch over a curb, slide past a concrete wall, and floor it down a straight. There are no massive asphalt runoff areas like modern tracks. If you make a mistake, you pay the price in the wall. Drivers love that high-stakes risk versus reward element. Plus, the atmosphere in Montreal is unmatched. The whole city basically turns into a massive F1 festival for the weekend.
Well, looking at the gaps on the track right now, nobody is taking it easy. It's a high-speed game of millimetres out here between the St. Lawrence River and the concrete walls.
That's Montreal for you, Lee. It rewards the brave, but it punishes the greedy.
Thanks so much for that, Sally. I definitely feel a bit more in touch with this iconic circuit now. Some incredible history there and a few tips to help me when I'm racing this track in the sim rig. I'm sure I will get up close and personal with the Wall of Champions at some point. Adding my name to the list of drivers it's vanquished. Right, let's check back in with the race action and let's get on board with Fernando Alonso in P13. He's had a pretty solid race so far in the Aston Martin, though he started the day in P14. You just know Alonso has his sights on some points here today.
Now, over to another driver with points in his sights today, Charles Leclerc. After losing his P1 to George Russell early in lap 1, Leclerc has managed to hold on to his P2, fending off attack after attack from Kimi Antonelli in P3. P1 is probably out of sight for him now though, as George Russell has built up quite a lead, and it's looking good for my prediction of a 1-2 Mercedes domination today.
You're not going to let me forget that prediction today, are you, Sally? Looking up at the sky today, the clouds are starting to look incredibly ominous. So maybe now is a great time to talk about the weather here in Montreal. This track has a real reputation for sudden downpours completely turning the race on its head. Why is the weather in Montreal always so unpredictable? And what happens to these high-tech cars when the track gets properly soaked?
The weather here is practically a character of its own. Because we are sitting on an island in the middle of a massive river, you get this microclimate effect. The temperature variations can swing anywhere from a freezing 3 degrees Celsius up to a sweltering 34 degrees. When a low pressure front hits that humid river air, it creates the perfect storm for torrential rain. And when it rains here, it doesn't just drizzle, it absolutely belts it down.
And with no massive asphalt runoffs like modern tracks, standing water must become an absolute nightmare between these concrete barriers.
And talking of nightmares, it looks like Charles Leclerc's barriers have finally been broken. Kimi Antonelli has just taken P2 away from him. Absolutely incredible. Maybe the weather is going to be the only chance for the rest of the grid today. Right, sorry for interrupting you there, Sally. So tell me more about the impacts of the standing water.
It's lethal. The track layout means rivers of water literally flow across the tarmac in the heavy braking zones, especially down into the hairpin and the final chicane. The cars start aquaplaning, which is where the tyres lift completely off the asphalt and float on a layer of water. At that point, the driver is just a passenger praying they don't hit a wall. If you want to see how crazy it gets, you only have to look back at 2 historic wet races here.
All right, lay them on me. When was the weather at its absolute worst?
Let's start with 1981, a race that cemented the Villeneuve legend. It was a total washout. The track was flooded. and visibility was practically zero because of the spray. Local hero Gilles-Villeneuve crashed his Ferrari and severely bent his front wing. It was pushed all the way up, completely blocking his vision out of the cockpit. In the pouring rain, instead of pitting, Gilles just used his peripheral vision, looked out the side of the cockpit, and used his supernatural car control to slide the car around to finish on the podium in third place. The crowd went completely berserk.
Driving a Formula One car in a torrential downpour with a wing blocking your windshield, that is old school insanity. What about modern history? Surely we've had some crazy wet weather recently.
Oh, the ultimate one, Lee. The 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. It officially went down in the history books as the longest race in Formula One history, clocking in at a staggering 4 hours, 4 minutes and 39 seconds.
4 hours? What on earth happened? Did the pit lane turn into a lake?
Pretty much. About 40 minutes into the race, a biblical rainstorm hit the track. The rain was so heavy that the race director had to throw a red flag and suspend the race for over 2 hours, just waiting for the storm to pass. The drivers were literally sitting in their garages eating bowls of pasta and playing games to pass the time, while the fans in the grandstands were completely drenched, wearing garbage bags and ponchos.
A 2-hour rain delay? That must have completely killed the momentum of the race.
It was the exact opposite. It was the most chaotic, dramatic race ever staged. When it restarted, the track was drying out, forcing everyone into a massive tyre gambling strategy. Jenson Button had the craziest race of his life. He collided with his own teammate Lewis Hamilton, crashed into Fernando Alonso, got a drive-through penalty for speeding behind the safety car, and dropped all the way to dead last place.
So he's sitting in last place. His car is damaged. He's had a penalty. I'm guessing you just give up at that point, right?
No. He put on a wet weather masterclass. He sliced through the field on the damp track, pitting a total of 6 times. On the very final lap of the race, he hunted down the leader, Sebastian Vettel, pressured him into making a mistake on a damp patch of tarmac at turn 6 and took the victory in the final seconds. It was pure Hollywood. They should definitely make a movie about it.
Unbelievable. 6 pit stops, dead last, a 2-hour rain delay, and you win it on the final lap. That really proves that when the weather hits Montreal, the rule book gets thrown right into the river.
It really does, Lee. That's why the teams down on the pit wall are constantly staring at their radar screens today. In Canada, you are only ever one cloud away from total anarchy.
Well, let's keep an eye on those clouds. Maybe we will have another race like that today. Well, Sally, looking at the grandstands around the circuit, there are a lot of Canadian flags waving today, and a huge chunk of them are for Aston Martin's Lance Stroll. Now, he's a bit of a polarizing figure in the paddock, isn't he? A lot of fans point to his billionaire dad owning the team and call him a pay driver. But you don't survive in Formula One for a decade just on a big wallet. What's the real story with Stroll?
He is one of the most fascinating characters on the grid, Lee. And you're right, the pay driver label has followed him his entire career because his father, Lawrence Stroll, bankrolled his junior career and eventually bought the actual Aston Martin team. But the history books don't lie. Before he ever reached F1, Lance absolutely dominated the junior categories. He won the Italian Formula 4 Championship and utterly crushed the field to win the European Formula 3 title. You can't buy those trophies, Lee. You still have to drive the car.
Fair point. Money gets you the seat, but it doesn't steer the wheel at 200 miles an hour. When did he actually break into F1, and how did his early days go?
He made his debut back in 2017 with Williams when he was just 18 years old, making him the second youngest debutant in F1 history behind Max Verstappen, and his rookie season had some unbelievable highs. In fact, right here in Montreal at the 2017 Canadian Grand Prix, he scored his very first F1 championship points in front of his home crowd. The atmosphere was electric.
Scoring your first points at your home race as a teenager, that must have been a dream come true. Did he manage to back that up later in the year?
Oh, he did something even crazier a few weeks later at Baku. In a chaotic Azerbaijan Grand Prix, Stroll kept his head down, drove a flawless race, and finished on the podium in third place. He became the youngest rookie in history to stand on an F1 podium. Later that same year, in a torrential downpour at Monza, he qualified on the front row of the grid in second place. That weekend proved to the entire paddock that when the track conditions get chaotic, Lance has some serious natural talent.
That's wild. So he actually thrives when things get messy? That sounds a bit like a quarterback who is at his best when the pocket collapses and he has to scramble.
That is the perfect analogy, Lee. Stroll is known in the paddock as an absolute maverick on lap 1. His reaction times at the lights are incredibly sharp. and he regularly makes up 3 or 4 positions on the opening lap just by finding gaps other drivers are too afraid to go for. And when it rains, his car control is elite. Remember the 2020 Turkish Grand Prix? In treacherous, icy wet conditions, he took a stunning pole position for Racing Point, shocking Mercedes and Red Bull.
Wow, okay, so the guy definitely has the credentials. But if he has these massive peaks, why does he still catch so much flack from the critics?
Because his biggest weakness is consistency, Lee. He can look like a world beater on a wet Saturday, but then have a string of races where he gets knocked out in Sector 1 of qualifying or gets caught in silly midfield tangles. Because his seat at Aston Martin is essentially guaranteed as long as his dad owns the company. He doesn't face the same sink or swim pressure as other drivers. Critics argue that lack of jeopardy keeps him from reaching his absolute ceiling.
Right, if you know you aren't getting dropped at the end of the season, maybe you lose that fractional edge you need to compete with guys like Fernando Alonso or Max Verstappen. But speaking of Montreal, how does he usually fare here? Is the home field advantage real for him?
It's a mixed bag. The pressure on him here is immense because he is the first local Montreal driver since Jacques Villeneuve. He's had some great recovery drives into the points here, but he's also had weekends where the pressure gets the better of him and he kisses the barriers. The Canadian fans love him though, and every time he makes an overtake down the Casino Straight, you can actually hear the grandstands erupt over the sound of the engines.
Well, love him or hate him, Lance Stroll is a permanent fixture of modern F1, and he's carrying the hopes of an entire nation on his shoulders every time he turns a wheel at this circuit.
Exactly, Lee. He might have had a golden ticket into the sport, but out here on the tarmac, the concrete walls don't care who your father is.
Thanks, Sally. And the one thing I know for sure, this crowd is almost certainly behind their hometown hero today. Okay, let's check back in with our race leader, George Russell. We talked earlier about George Russell having a brilliant run around this island, but you mentioned something earlier that completely blew my mind. You said back in 2024, he and Max Verstappen tied for pole position down to the exact thousandth of a second. Sally, how is that even physically possible with 2 completely different cars?
It sounds like a glitch in the Matrix, doesn't it? But it genuinely happened right here in Montreal. During the final segment of qualifying in 2024, George Russell hooked up an absolute flyer in his Mercedes and crossed the line, stopping the clocks at 1 minute and 12 seconds exactly. A few minutes later, Max Verstappen flew down the Casino Straight in his Red Bull, crossed the line, and the timing screens lit up with the exact same time. So both drivers hit that 1 minute and 12 seconds within a few minutes of each other.
Unbelievable. 1 minute and 12 seconds exactly. If it's a dead heat like that, how on earth do the officials decide who gets to start on pole on Sunday? Do they flip a coin, or do the drivers have an old school arm wrestle in the pit lane?
Ah, that's brilliant, Lee. But as entertaining as that would be, the FIA rulebook is very clear on this. Under the sporting regulations, if 2 or more drivers set identical times in qualifying, priority is given to the driver who set the lap time first. Because George set his lap earlier in the session, he was awarded pole position, and Max had to settle for second on the front row.
Wow, talk about a tough break for Verstappen. Imagine driving a flawless lap at 200 miles an hour, tying the fastest time and losing pole position just because you queued up at the end of the pit lane 2 minutes later than the other guy.
It's agonizing, and what makes it even crazier is that a 1 to 12.000 flat is an incredibly rare number to hit exactly. But believe it or not, Lee, it wasn't the first time this happened in F1 history. The ultimate qualifying miracle happened at the final race of 1997 in Jerez. In that session, 3 drivers, Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen, all set the exact same lap time of a 1:21.072.
Hold on, Jacques Villeneuve, the Canadian F1 hero we were talking about earlier? This island certainly has a lot of history.
It really does. It just goes to show you how insanely competitive modern Formula One is. The engineers spend hundreds of millions of pounds developing custom aerodynamics and hybrid powertrains, and it all boils down to a margin so thin that our human brains can barely even process it.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing that with us, Sally.
Right, let's jump on board now with George Russell's Mercedes teammate, Kimi Antonelli.
You know, watching Kimi out there today, it's hard to believe he's already in his second full season with Mercedes. Last year, the whole narrative was about the immense pressure of stepping up and filling Lewis's seat as a rookie. But now, he just looks entirely at home. Sally, how are you seeing his progression in year 2, especially with everyone having to adapt to these massive 2026 regulation changes?
It's a night and day difference in his overall racecraft, Lee. In his rookie season, we obviously saw those brilliant flashes of raw, explosive speed, speed, but it occasionally came at the cost of his tyre life. This year, the maturity is really showing. These new 2026 cars have a 50-50 split between electrical and internal combustion power, meaning the torque delivery out of slow corners is incredibly aggressive. Kimi has adapted beautifully to that. He's managing the rear traction much better, which proves he's done a lot of learning behind the scenes.
You can definitely feel that aggressive power delivery on the sim rig. If I'm not millimeter perfect with the throttle out of the slow stuff, the wheel practically rips my hands off. But looking across the garage, George Russell is firmly entrenched as the team leader now. Last year was his first real test leading the charge. How is their dynamic shifting now that Kimi has a full year of experience and is properly turning the screws on him?
Definitely forcing George to find another gear. Last year, George was heavily focused on steadying the ship during the transition and being the dependable point scorer. But now that they are deep into developing this entirely new 2026 chassis, the pressure is relentless. Russell's greatest strength is his technical feedback. He's incredibly analytical, feeding precise, reliable data back to the engineers to help upgrade the car. But with Kimi now fully up to speed and matching him on sheer pace, George is having to balance being the development leader with vigorously defending his territory. He knows the kid in the other garage isn't just learning anymore, he's competing.
It's such a brilliant intra-team battle. You've got the seasoned analytical team leader and the young gun who now has the experience to really take the fight to him every weekend. And speaking of taking the fight, let's get back to the action with our race leader George Russell. After talking about the rise of Kimi Antonelli, it's easy to dismiss how this might affect his teammate. I think George is handling things brilliantly. After all, he was once the young phenom tipped for greatness himself. How does his journey compare to the pressure we are seeing right now?
It is a brilliant comparison, Lee, because people often forget just how ruthless George was coming through the junior categories. He didn't just win GP3 and Formula 2, he won them back-to-back in his rookie seasons in 2017 and 2018, beating drivers like Lando Norris and Alex Albon. That is the ultimate hallmark of a future world champion. But unlike Antonelli, who is being fast-tracked straight to the front, George had to serve a grueling 3-year apprenticeship at the very back of the grid with a struggling Williams team. For years, he was fighting just to get out of Q1, but he consistently dragged uncompetitive machinery into places it didn't belong, earning him that famous Mr. Saturday moniker. Then came the heartbreak of Sakir in 2020. Stepping in for Lewis Hamilton, he had his maiden win cruelly snatched away by a botched pit stop and a late puncture. But that night proved to Toto Wolff that he was ready. When he finally secured that full-time Mercedes drive in 2022, he delivered immediately, taking a flawless maiden victory at Interlagos in Brazil. But Formula One moves fast. Now the dynamic has completely flipped. He is no longer the young apprentice trying to unseat the veteran. He is the established team leader. And with the sheer raw speed of Kimi Antonelli breathing right down his neck, this season is the ultimate test of George's mental resilience.
He has certainly earned his stripes the hard way. He went from the hunter to the hunted in the blink of an eye. But he's definitely taking it in his stride today. And he's built up a massive 16-second lead up over Kimi. It's very hard to see anything other than another George Russell win here today. Though, the clouds are looking very ominous right now though, Sally. I think that rain we talked about may be moving in. As we said before, it might only be the weather that could throw a spanner in the works today for George. Or maybe a rogue Marmot. Joking aside though, I am sure we will start to see drivers pitting in soon. I think it's a matter of when rather than if when it comes to this rain forecast.
Absolutely, Lee. There is definitely activity coming from the Mercedes pit crew, so a change definitely feels imminent. The clouds are definitely looking very heavy now, so it's going to be interesting to see what tyre choices are made. George is currently on the white-rimmed hard tyres, and we will want to stay on these as long as possible. But with this weather being so changeable, it's going to be a gamble either way. Definitely going to be interesting.
Right, let's jump back on board with Kimi Antonelli here. Now, Sally, I'll hold my hands up here. I absolutely love driving these things on the sim rig, but I'm a bit of a noob when it comes to the deep engineering side. He just used DRS. Break that down for me. What actually is it?
DRS stands for Drag Reduction System. If you look closely at the rear wing of the car as they hit the straight, you'll see the top flap literally hinge open. These cars generate a massive amount of aerodynamic downforce to stay glued to the track in the corners. But on a straight, that same downforce acts like a giant parachute. Opening that flap dumps the drag, giving the car an instant top speed boost of around 10 to 15 miles per hour.
It's basically a legal cheat code for the straights then. But Kimi couldn't do that on the previous lap when they were battling. What are the actual rules for it? Because you can't just mash the button whenever you feel like going faster, surely.
Exactly. It's heavily regulated by race control. To use it during a race, a driver has to be within 1 second of the car ahead of them at a specific detection point on the track. If they are, the system is armed, they get a beep in their earpiece, and they're allowed to trigger the wing open once they cross into the designated DRS activation zone.
Ah, got it. So it's not just about being close. You have to be within that 1 second window at the exact right moment to earn it. And I'm guessing they only put those zones on the straights because if you opened it in a fast corner, well, you'd end up in the barriers.
Precisely. Without that rear downforce, the car would just snap and spin out the moment you turn the wheel at high speed. The system is smart though. The flap snaps shut automatically the second the driver touches the brake pedal at the end of the straight, returning all that grip exactly when they need it for the corner.
Fascinating stuff. Well, whatever the science is, Kimi timed it to absolute perfection there. Beautiful move.
Let's jump further down the grid now and check in with Oscar Piastri in P7. He has had a pretty solid race so far, but he has remained exactly where he started.
It has been a frustratingly quiet afternoon for Oscar. When you look at his telemetry, he is pushing that McLaren to the absolute limit, but he just doesn't have the outright pace to make a move. And it is a stark contrast to what we saw last season. Remember, 12 months ago, McLaren were the absolute benchmark on this grid. They had the aero efficiency that everyone else was chasing. But this year, the development war has completely shifted. Mercedes has unlocked something massive in their setup, and it has left McLaren scrambling to play catch-up. Oscar is driving a very mature race today, but P7 is genuinely the maximum potential of that car right now.
It is certainly a reality check for the McLaren team this year. But speaking of that dominant Mercedes pace, let's turn our attention to the pit lane. It looks like George Russell is the first to blink, diving in for his first stop of the day. And the big question, will he stay on those yellow-rimmed medium tyres?
Looks like they are sticking with the mediums for now, Lee. I wonder if they know something the rest of the grid doesn't. The rain looks like it's going to come down any time now, so this is definitely a gamble. I wonder if the others will follow suit. There is a lot of activity now in the pit lane, so it's about to get very busy here. Next up, we have Charles Leclerc pulling in. Looks like he's kept the mediums too. And next, Max Verstappen, who has done the same. Maybe our weather radars are not calibrated, Lee. I was almost certain we would see those green-rimmed intermediate tyres.
It has me puzzled too. Next we see Hadjar pulling in, and as we watch these backmarker pit stops,
It's a perfect time to dive into the technical side. Sally, for anyone watching who might be newer to the sport, break down the F1 tyre rainbow for us. What are all the different options and why do teams choose them?
It's one of the most critical elements of a race weekend, Lee, and it's a massive high-speed game of chess. Pirelli, the tyre supplier, provides 5 main types of tyres. First, you have the dry weather slicks. There's the soft tyre, marked with a red band, the medium, with a yellow band, and the hard tyre, marked in white. The rule of thumb is simple. The softer the tyre, the more grip and pure speed you get, but the faster it shreds to pieces on the abrasive track. The hard tyre gives you much less peak grip, but you can run it for almost an entire race if you manage it well.
I can definitely vouch for that on the sim rig. When I bolt on the red softs, the car feels like it's glued to the track for about 3 laps. But then the force feedback through the wheel just goes completely numb, and suddenly I'm sliding everywhere like I'm on ice. But to run the white hards, you really have to be incredibly patient with your inputs. Has anyone ever just slapped the hards on and refused to pit?
Absolutely. One of the greatest examples in recent memory was Alex Albon at the Australian Grand Prix in 2022. He started from the very back of the grid on a set of white hard tyres and drove 57 out of the 58 laps on that single set of rubber. He managed the tyre temperatures so perfectly that he actually climbed all the way into the points. He only pitted on the very last lap because the FIA rules mandate that you must use 2 different tyre compounds during a dry race.
That is just ridiculous tyre whispering. To keep the car on the track for that long on one set is mind-blowing. But obviously, those dry slicks are completely useless to the grid right now. Everyone out there is running the wet weather rubber. We've got the green intermediates on at the moment, but there's also the extreme wets with the blue band, right? What's the tipping point for switching between them?
It's all about standing water. The slick, dry tyres are completely smooth, so if they hit a puddle, the car just aquaplanes. It essentially becomes a very expensive, uncontrollable speedboat. The green intermediates have grooves cut into them to physically disperse the water. They are perfect for a damp track, like we have right now. But if we get a torrential downpour, they have to switch to the blue extreme wets. Those have massive deep treads that act like water pumps, clearing out much more water.
So it's a constant gamble between having enough tread to survive the deep puddles, but not so much tread that the tyres overheat when the track starts drying out. What's the craziest example of a driver having to cycle through all of these different conditions in one race?
Without a doubt, the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. It was an absolute monsoon. Easily one of the craziest races in F1 history. Jenson Button pitted a staggering 6 times during that race. He had to drive on extreme wets, intermediates, and dry slicks as the weather constantly changed. He was running dead last at one point, but because he and his McLaren team read the tyre conditions perfectly through the changing weather, he fought his way through the entire field to win the race on the final lap. It's the ultimate proof that having the fastest engine means absolutely nothing if you aren't on the right tyre.
Just legendary stuff. It really proves that Formula One is as much a team sport on the pit wall as it is an individual sport in the cockpit.
Well, I hate to use cliches, Lee, but there is no I in team.
Right, back on board now with Antonelli as he looks to wrestle back P2 from Lando Norris. Norris opted to stay out when Antonelli pitted and managed to gain that P2 spot. But the McLaren was no match for a fresh-tyred Mercedes there. And it's no surprise that Lando looks to be pitting in now. The tyres are definitely falling off a cliff right now. I was looking down at the pit lane just before Kimi came in, and there was a lot of activity from the McLaren pit crew. The mechanics sprinted out into the lane, stood there looking very important with a fresh set of tyres, and then just trotted back inside. Did they dummy the Mercedes team into pitting? Is there a method in their madness?
I think they did, and what you saw there, Lee, is one of the oldest, sneakiest tricks in the book. And yes, it's called a dummy pit stop, or a phantom stop. It's pure psychological warfare at 200 miles an hour.
Right, so they're basically playing a game of chicken. Look at us, we're pitting, you better pit too. That sort of thing?
Exactly. The goal is to panic the team ahead of you. If you're trailing a car and you can't get past them on the track, you try to trick them into pitting earlier than they want to. If they bite the bait and dive into the pit lane to defend their position, they might ruin their tyre strategy for the rest of the race. Meanwhile, your driver stays out in clean air and pumps in fast laps.
But wait a minute, Sally. Don't the teams listen to each other's radios? If the engineer tells the driver to pit, the other team hears it. How do they hide it?
Oh, they don't just say, "Okay, mate, let's trick them." They use code words or conditional instructions. An engineer might say over the radio, "Box opposite to Red Bull," or use a code like Plan Delta, target +3. That means if the car ahead pits, you do the opposite and stay out. But because the pit crew has to be ready just in case the car ahead stays out and you decide to pit, the mechanics legally have to run out. It gives the team perfect plausible deniability with the stewards.
Wait a minute, Sally. Code words, fake urgency? This sounds exactly like a quarterback standing under centre shouting a hard count on 4th and short.
Spot on, Lee. It is exactly like an NFL hard count. Think about Peyton Manning screaming "Omaha, Omaha," or Aaron Rodgers barking out a completely fake cadence. The quarterback is standing there acting like the ball is coming right now, trying to get the defensive line to twitch and jump off sides.
Right, and the offensive linemen have to sit perfectly still because they know the real code word, while the defensive ends are just reacting to the sound of his voice.
Exactly. In F1, the pit crew running out is the visual equivalent of the quarterback stomping his foot or dipping his shoulders. It looks 100% real. The opposing team on the pit wall are like the defensive linemen. They see the mechanics grab the tyres, they panic, they jump across the line to cover it, and boom, they've just given away a strategic advantage.
Unbelievable. The rule book says no, but the lawyers say yes. Has this trick actually worked in real life, or do the top teams see right through it?
Oh, it absolutely works, but it can backfire spectacularly. Let's look at history. A classic example where it failed was the British Grand Prix back in 2015. Williams were shockingly leading the race, and Mercedes sent their mechanics out to trigger an early stop and force Williams to react. But the Williams pit wall didn't budge. In fact, Toto Wolff's wife, Susie, was actually a test driver for Williams at the time, and she allegedly texted him during the race saying, "You guys think you can fool us? Ha ha ha." The FIA actually gave Mercedes a stern warning after that one. But when it works, it's beautiful. Ferrari and Red Bull have traded blows with this for years. Think about Monaco or Abu Dhabi, where track position is everything. If you can force your rival into traffic by faking a stop, you've basically won the race right there on the pit wall.
Okay, I think we all need a bit of a laugh after all of that. Let's jump on board now with Esteban Ocon. He seems to be getting pestered by one of the island's famous inhabitants. Let's listen in to find out more.
Well guys, There's a small brown animal running onto the track at turn 7. Not sure what it is.
Copy that. Our data strategist confirms that's one of Montreal's iconic marmots. Nothing to worry about, mate, but try your best to avoid it.
Thanks guys, I will try my best.
Well, that's something different. I'm looking at the track, and unless my eyes are playing tricks on me, there is a giant furry creature sitting right on the apex of turn 4, just casually watching the cars fly past at 200 miles an hour. Is that a team mascot that's got loose, or am I losing my mind?
That's so funny! And no, you're not losing your mind, Lee. Welcome to the unofficial co-hosts of the Canadian Grand Prix, the Montreal Groundhogs. They are actually ground marmots, a specific species of large rodents that live all over Notre Dame Island. And during race weekend, they treat the track like their personal living room.
Hold on a minute, you're telling me these little guys just wander onto a live Formula 1 circuit? Aren't they terrified of a 1,000 horsepower hybrid engine screaming past their twitching noses?
You'd think so, but these marmots have lived on this island for generations. The park is their home 361 days a year, so when F1 rolls into town, they don't really care. They are shockingly brave, or completely oblivious. Every single year, we get footage of a marmot casually strolling across the back straight, while a Ferrari or a Red Bull misses them by literally inches.
That is absolutely terrifying. I mean, it's funny to look at, but if a car hits one of those at top speed, that's not just bad news for the wildlife. That's a massive safety hazard for the driver, surely.
Oh, it absolutely is. These aren't little field mice, Lee. A full-grown marmot can weigh up to 13 pounds. Hitting one at 200 miles an hour is like striking a solid brick. It will instantly shatter a carbon fiber front wing, ruin the aerodynamics, and can even smash the suspension or cause a massive crash. The drivers are genuinely on high alert for them.
Has anyone actually had a proper run-in with them in the past, or have they all been lucky escapes?
We've had both. Back in 2007, Anthony Davidson was running in an incredible third place for Super Aguri when he unfortunately struck a marmot down the back straight. It broke his front wing, forced him to pit, and completely ruined his race. But the most famous incident happened in 2018 with Sebastian Vettel.
What happened with Vettel? Did he try to sign one for a fan or something?
No, but don't give these drivers any ideas. Vettel was leading the race and had to slam on his brakes because two marmots were literally sitting in the middle of the track having a casual conversation. Afterward, on the team radio, he shouted to his engineer, "There are two groundhogs on the track. I think they wanted to commit suicide. They had a front row seat." He even brought it up in the post-race press conference, complaining that they were endangering his lead.
Only Sebastian Vettel would get mad at rodents for ruining his racing line. I do miss him. He was definitely one of the most colourful characters to roam the paddock. Now, does the FIA actually do anything to protect them? Or is it just down to survival of the fastest for the marmots too? I guess at least they have that in common with the drivers.
They do try. Before the weekend starts, local wildlife officials actually go around the island with humane traps to catch as many marmots as possible and relocate them to a safer part of the park away from the track. But marmots are expert diggers, Lee. They've built massive underground tunnel networks across the island, so no matter how many you catch, a few always manage to pop out of a hole mid-race to see what all the noise is about.
That's absolutely bonkers. So forget about tyre strategy, track limits and engine maps. The real challenge in Canada is dodging high-speed chubby rodents who don't understand the concept of a racing line.
That's right, Lee. In Montreal, you don't just have to beat the grid, you have to beat the wildlife too.
Incredible. So I guess this means we have 2 Groundhog Days each year. I wonder if today's groundhogs see a shadow. Maybe the teams can ditch all the weather radars and just employ a few groundhogs for the Montreal race?
So funny. I never thought of that. Well, that's one of my questions sorted for the press conference later.
Interesting. I'll look forwards to that, Sally. I can't wait to see what Toto Wolff makes of that question. And let's face it, if there is one circuit that needs some extra help with the weather, it's this one. Well, Sally, thanks so much for that detailed overview of the Marmots of Montreal. It's been so funny seeing them in their natural habitat, casually strolling around the track. Right, guys, time has gotten away from me on this one. I did not get time to complete the commentary, but I hope you will stay with us to enjoy the rest of the race.
the checkered flag. Here's our winner. By George, he's done it. Russell wins.
Wow, that race really kept us on our toes with the ever-changing weather conditions. It is so unpredictable when you're in the car, with visibility being limited to know exactly what's going on. So the driver really made some great calls in this situation.
From lights out to the checkered flag, this is what they're racing for. It's points and a trip to the podium. By George, he was good today. The top step awaits for George Russell.